Thanks, Sapna. Let's get in some reactions from India Inc. How is India Inc. gearing up to the July 1 deadline now? Harsh Mariwala, Chairman of Marico, joins in to answer that precise question. Mr. Mariwala, good evening. Thanks very much for joining us here on India Business Hour. Now you have clarity. 1st of July is what the government has said. Does that give India Inc. ample time to get used to GST? Because, you know, in countries where GST has been implemented, it is said that companies have been given at least 12 to 18 months from the time the GST rules have been finalized. In this case, at best, you're going to get few months from the time GST rules are finalized. So are you happy with the July 1st deadline nonetheless, sir?
See, I think we have to work within a certain time frame, and the maximum we are allowed to do it as per the constitutional amendment bill was September 1st. So I think July is a reasonable time frame. We have to meet the challenge. GST is in offing for last few years now, and I think it's a matter of time. We already have got 3 months extra from April to July, so I think it's fair, and we have to meet up the challenge because beyond that, the maximum we can go up to is September 1st. So between July and September, I think we have to try hard and make July happen.
Mr. Mariwala, I get the point that July is perhaps more realistic than April, but what are the immediate challenges that you foresee? Because several analysts, several players have expected and put numbers to the impact, the losses that could be in the interim while corporate India is trying to get ready for GST. So what are the challenges that you think corporate India needs to prepare for?
I think first of all, we have to realize that whatever rules, regulation, compliances, we are in line with what is suggested. I think the problem will be faced by smaller businessmen and not by larger companies, because the large companies have been ready. They have been preparing to meet the GST challenge for some time now. A lot also will depend on the GST rates and the classification of goods. So a bit early to say who will get impacted and whether it will lead to inflation. But the fact that there are 4 sets of rates, I think if the government does a good job in classifying them in the right brackets, I don't think it will lead to high inflation. So overall, I think it's a very good move, and I personally think that the industry should meet the challenge.
Well, indeed, sir, it is a historic day. It was the 9th GST Council meeting and perhaps clearly the most productive one. But I want to get your reaction on one specific clause, Mr. Mariwala. In fact, Finance Minister of West Bengal has been voicing his concern. And this is a clause under Chapter 25 of the draft GST bill that essentially empowers the tax officers to go and arrest somebody if somebody has not sort of paid back the GST that's been collected. And for that, any tax violation above the 2 crore will be eligible for arrest, but that is still bailable. But any tax violation above 5 crore is non-bailable. And this is something Amit Mitra says can concern industry, and therefore the government should do away with. Your quick reaction on that, sir?
See, any law which is so punitive in terms of punishment can be misused. So I think it's important that the government give some more time to industry to meet this challenge and not come out with very, very strict guidelines which lead to imprisonment. But I would say that they should be a little more liberal in this area, because if there's genuine error which leads to this, then leading to an imprisonment will be a very harsh punishment.
Okay, Mr. Mariwala, another point that I wanted your reaction was states will now get the right to assess and audit 90% of the entities with a turnover of below 1.5 crore rupees, and the rest will fall under centre's jurisdiction. Now, this point is something that tax experts say will be complicated and will be difficult for corporate India to audit. Do you agree with that point?
I think this is a question which the tax expert should be answering, and I am not a tax expert, so I think I'll leave it to the tax expert to give their views on this.
No, fair enough, Mr. Mariwala. But one final question before we end this conversation, sir. You know, again, as I said, the 9th GST Council meeting clearly has been the most productive one. July 1st deadline has now been, has been laid out by the Finance Minister himself. Any potential deal breaker, that the industry fears and for which you might be keeping your fingers crossed?
See, I think the biggest issue now to be resolved is the classification of goods, in which bracket they fall and under what rate they are classified into. Because if there is a big difference between the states and the center on this, then it can get derailed, and nobody knows what are the classification and which goods are going to go into which classification. So I think that's an important step which needs to be resolved.
Yes. Thanks very much for those words, Mr. Mariwala. We'll let you go. That was Harsh Mariwala, Marico, giving us his quick reaction on what and how he sees today's developments and what could be some of the risks going forward.